In the heart of Verde Valley, where the sun beat down without mercy and the dust clung to the skin like an old punishment, lived an Apache woman known to everyone as Nita Redfeather. Her shack, built from cracked adobe and rusted metal sheets, stood more out of habit than strength. No one visited her. No one greeted her. No one except the wind and her 2 children. Quito, a 14-year-old boy who already spoke like a man, and Suri, an 11-year-old girl with eyes as deep as rivers. Ever since her husband had died under unclear circumstances, some said it was illness, others blamed bad luck, Nita had become a shadow among her own people. Not out of fear, but from habit. At the market, women turned their faces away. In the square, children whispered things they didn't even understand. And among the adults, there was always the same quiet murmur. Poor thing. So alone and so ugly. Taya Crow and Lyra Holloway, young Apache women with shiny braids and embroidered dresses that always looked freshly made, mocked her openly whenever Nita crossed the square carrying her basket of corn or beans. That morning was no different. "Look at her," Taya said, raising her voice just enough for everyone to hear. "Dresses like the world ended years ago. And maybe for her it did, huh?" Lyra let out a hollow laugh. "Not even a desert miracle could lift that one up." Nita didn't respond. She never did. She lowered her gaze, hugged the basket to her chest, and kept walking down the dusty street, her worn-out sandals kicking up clouds of dirt with every step. She had learned that silence hurt less than confrontation, and in Apache land, that said a lot. The road home was long and lonely, lined with dry mesquite trees and half-fallen fences. Quito was waiting by the door with a bucket of water he had pulled from the well. Suri was out in the garden, clearing rocks from the soil with her small but determined hands. "Everything okay, Mama?" Quito asked, reading something on her face she could no longer hide. Nita nodded with a toothless smile. "Everything that needs to be." That afternoon, while she stirred a simple stew of beans and a piece of stale bread, Nita felt a presence. It wasn't the wind, nor her children. It was something heavier, more human. A horse's trot broke the routine, and the neighbor's dogs barked in the distance. From the shade of the doorway, a man appeared. He was tall, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, a dusty shirt, and worn leather boots. His horse, a well-fed paint, snorted loudly. She recognized him, even though they had never spoken. Cole Mercer, the passing cowboy who traded tobacco, grain, and hides in nearby towns. "Good afternoon," he said, still on horseback. "Afternoon," Nita replied, without lifting her eyes. "You alone?" "Always." Cole dismounted slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "Let me keep you company for a bit," he said, not asking, just stating it. Nita frowned. No one talked to her like that. No one showed interest. No one except maybe a fool or someone with something to gain. "That's not necessary," she muttered. "Then it's fair," he answered. And just like that, he began to walk beside her, leading his horse by the reins. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. Some grunted. Others whispered gossip. But Cole didn't seem to notice. He walked with Nita all the way to her home. In silence. With the steady step of a man who needs no explanation. When they arrived, Nita muttered a barely audible, "Thank you," and went inside without looking back. Cole stood for a few moments outside the shack. He took in the sight of the crooked corral, the skinny hens, the children on the porch. Then he mounted his horse and rode off, leaving behind a trail of dust. And questions. That night Nita didn't sleep. Not out of fear, but because, for the first time in years, someone had seen her. Not as a burden, not as a bother, But as a person, and in a land where everyone was clawing to be seen, that was worth more than gold buried beneath the sand. The next morning, Nita Redfeather could still feel the echo of the horse's hooves lingering in the dusty corners of her thoughts. It wasn't common for a stranger to dismount just to walk beside a woman like her, much less a cowboy like Cole Mercer, known for his fair dealings and his slow, honest way of speaking, without flair or empty promises. Quito watched her as she kneaded dough for the flatbreads. "Mama, who was that man?" he asked. Nita pretended not to hear. Hope hurt more than poverty. "Just someone passing through." But deep down, she knew he wasn't just someone. There'd been something in his eyes, not the look of a man driven by hunger nor pity, but a calm, a kind of quiet respect that made her feel different. Not prettier, not younger, but less invisible. That same afternoon, with the sun slanting low over the parched fields and the air heavy with the scent of old firewood, Cole returned. He didn't bring gifts nor fancy words, just himself, riding his white paint horse with a cloth bag tied to the saddle horn. He stopped in front of the house and dismounted slowly. Nita was sitting on a rock, peeling corn. She didn't move. She just looked at him. "Thought you might need a little salt," he said, raising the bag. She looked at him. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. No one had brought her anything, let alone a genuine look, in years. "Thank you," she murmured, glancing away like someone trying to cover a fresh wound. Cole took a step closer. "Mind if I stay a while?" Nita swallowed hard. Her heart was pounding like an Apache drum before battle. "I don't have a place to sit," she said, almost like an excuse. "The ground'll do me just fine," he replied. And so he did. He sat right there on the earth, hat resting on his knees, eyes calmly taking in the battered corral, the smoke-stained walls, and the bare feet of little Suri playing with a stick. "This place has a story," he said. "This place has scars," Nita corrected, not knowing why she dared speak to him like that. Quito came out with a jug of water and handed it to the stranger. Cole drank, winked at the boy, and thanked him like he was a grown man. It was the first time Quito had smiled in days. A few minutes passed in silence. The good kind of silence, the kind that doesn't weigh anything. Then Cole stood up, brushed off the dust, and looked at Nita with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Mind if I come by again sometime?" "For what?" "To keep seeing what the others don't," and he left, just as calmly as he'd arrived. That night, by the low fire, Nita stared at the embers, eyes damp. What did that man want? What was he looking for in a woman with no beauty, no family, no name? Fear crept through every crack in her soul. The fear of believing that maybe, just maybe, she could still be seen. The next morning, when the sun was just grazing the wooden rooftops, Cole Mercer returned. This time he carried a woven basket with warm bread, cheese, and a sprig of rosemary tied with string. When Nita opened the door, she thought it was a dream. Her children ran to the basket like it was the first gift they'd seen in years. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking from within. Cole stepped closer. He didn't touch her, didn't push. He just looked at her. "Because there are things the world has forgotten how to care for, and I don't want to forget them." She bit her lip. She didn't know whether to send him away or ask him to stay forever. Instead, she looked him in the eyes, for the first time. And for a moment, for a fleeting blink, she didn't feel ashamed. That's when she understood. Not all men look the same. Some see with their eyes, some with greed. But the best ones see with their soul. And though she didn't know it yet, Nita Redfeather had been seen by one of those. The sun was barely rising over the dry hills of Verde Valley when Cole Mercer appeared on horseback, riding his finest stallion, a chestnut with a proud gait, wind-blown mane, and freshly shod hooves. He wore a clean cotton shirt, polished boots, and his hat fitted square, as if he knew this morning wouldn't be like the others. The first to spot him were the men sipping bitter coffee on the store porch. They fell silent. Then the women, just starting to place tomatoes into their selling baskets, and then the children, always the first to chase after rumors. But no one expected Cole Mercer, the most respected cowboy in the region, the one who rode the trade routes across half the county, to stop his horse right in the middle of town square, dismount calmly, and raise his voice. "Good morning," he said firmly, meeting every face that peeked out from windows, porches, and corners. "I've come looking for Nita Redfeather." A heavy silence fell over the square like a wet blanket. "The Apache widow?" someone muttered. "Yes, her." From a corner of the market, Taya Crow and Lyra Holloway, those two young women who always thought they were the center of the world, stared at each other, lips slightly parted. Their skirts were earth-toned, their hairstyles carefully done, as if each day was a parade. Surprise robbed them of words, but the venom in their eyes had already started to boil. "And what do you want her for?" a mocking voice called out. Cole didn't flinch. "Because I want to speak with her, and her children. Because there's something I should have said long ago, that I admire her, and I want to get to know her the way she deserves." A murmur followed, a whisper like wind rustling trees before a storm. Cole didn't wait for permission. He mounted up again and rode straight down the path that led to Nita's humble shack, leaving behind a trail of stares, whispers, and racing hearts. Nita was sweeping the yard when she heard the hooves. Quito and Suri were out gathering dry wood. She wasn't expecting visitors, especially not that morning. When she saw Cole stop in front of her door, her heart skipped a beat. "Morning, Nita," he said, dismounting like he'd known her all his life. She didn't respond right away. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Has something happened?" "Yes," he said. "I'm tired of staying quiet." She frowned. "I've spent 3 years watching you," he went on. "Watching you raise your kids, help the elders, endure stares that cut deeper than words. 3 years wondering if you'd ever notice that someone out here does see your worth. And today, I've decided I don't want to wait any longer." Nita looked down. Her legs felt weak, as if the ground beneath her had gone soft. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because you don't flash fake smiles. Because when you help someone, you do it without an audience. Because you're raising those kids with what little you've got, and you don't complain. Because you're worth more than all those women who act like queens without a crown. And because—" he paused. "I'm not looking for a perfect woman, just a real one." Nita didn't know what to say. Suri was staring at her with wide eyes. Quito gripped a stick in his hands, like he still couldn't make sense of what was happening. The wind swept dry leaves to their feet. The silence stung. "I'm not pretty," she said. Cole took a step closer. He gently lifted her chin with a tenderness that unraveled her. "That's what they've made you believe. But I see someone brave. And that, Nita, that's beautiful." He didn't say more. Didn't touch her again. He just tipped his hat and walked away, leaving behind a promise in the air. A promise no poverty, no gossip, and no years could erase. And in the depths of the valley, Between the dust and the silence, an invisible seed began to grow. The days that followed felt different, even if the sky looked the same and the dust still rose with the passing mules. Cole Mercer started showing up every couple of days. No warning, no fancy words. Sometimes he brought something for the kids. A new rope for Quito, colored beads for Suri. Other times he brought wood to patch the roof or basil seeds to plant in the garden. But what he really brought was something else. He brought the good kind of quiet, attentive listening, slow smiles, and a way of looking that didn't just glance. It held. Nita Redfeather didn't fully understand what was happening. Part of her, the part that had grown used to loneliness, told her she was fooling herself, that men weren't like this. But another part, a small, stubborn piece of her, like a root that refused to die, had begun to believe. The children felt it too. Quito, wary at first, started asking about Cole's horses. Suri began to sing more often. The house, which once felt like damp stone, now smelled of bread, quiet laughter, and freshly cut wood. But not everyone took it the same. In the town square, Taya Crow and Lyra Holloway weren't whispering anymore. Now they spoke loud, and venom sharp. They walked with their necks stiff and their lips tight, like the world owed them something. "That cowboy's been bewitched," Lyra said at the market. "That woman's done something to him. Given him moon water or smoked him with sage. There's no other explanation." "The worst part," Taya added, arms crossed, "is he thinks he can replace us with that plain nobody. She better brace herself. We're gonna knock her off her little cloud." And they said it loud, loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough for the echo to reach every ear in town, because nothing stung them more than watching a quiet woman be happy, without permission. That night, Nita found a white envelope tucked beneath the leather blanket hanging from the door. No name on it, just a smudge of dust and the pressed marks of angry fingers. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside, in crooked, harsh lettering. "Do you really think a man like him is going to stay with you? He's using you, and when he's done, you'll be lonelier than ever. If you have a shred of dignity, walk away, or we'll make sure you regret it." The paper slipped from her hands. Her chest clenched tight, like a fist had closed around her heart. She stepped outside with the lantern, but saw nothing. Only the black hush of night, the dry branches of the poplars, and that thick silence that sometimes feels just like fear. She said nothing to Quito or Suri. She hid the letter deep beneath the bottom blankets, where no one would find it. And when Cole arrived the next day with a basket of fresh figs and a new cloth for the table, she smiled. But it wasn't the same smile. It was a measured smile, the kind you wear when you've learned that affection can come with claws. That afternoon, when he offered to ride with her to the fabric shop to pick out what they'd need for the wedding, because yes, they were already talking about a wedding, like time didn't matter when love came in clear and certain, she hesitated for just a second, then nodded. And deep inside, she swore not to show fear again, even if fear had already begun walking beside her like an old shadow. What Nita didn't know was that this first attempt to break her was just the beginning, and that when envy can't destroy love, it turns into hate. The sky over Verde Valley looked clearer that morning. Clouds floated like scattered sheep, and the air carried the scent of damp earth. Nita Redfeather had gone down early to the creek to wash clothes, her hair tied in a modest braid, sleeves rolled up past her elbows. Her face, marked by years and grief, held a shy glow, one that only comes when the soul starts remembering what hope feels like. Cole Mercer found her there, kneeling between flat stones, scrubbing a blanket with firm hands. "Beautiful morning," he said, dismounting from his horse. Nita barely looked up, but she smiled. He set a small wooden box on a nearby rock. He didn't say what it held. "What's that?" she asked, not stopping her washing. "Open it." Inside, carefully folded, was a dress, deep indigo blue, soft fabric, with simple embroidery at the sleeves. It wasn't flashy. It was right, like someone had imagined how Nita would feel looking into a mirror, and, for once, liking what she saw. She ran her fingers across the fabric, not quite daring to lift it completely. "What does this mean, Cole?" He shrugged. "It means if we're going to the market together, I want you to go the way you deserve, not the way they've made you see yourself." That day, for the first time in many years, Nita walked through the town market with her head held high. The dress fluttered softly in the wind, and though her sandals were still the same and her hair remained unadorned, something in her step had changed. Beside her, Cole walked without hurry, calm and steady, his eyes fixed on her as if everything else was just background noise. He carried a bag with dried beans, cornmeal, and some tools for the corral. But folks weren't looking at the bag. They were looking at them. They were looking at Nita Redfeather, the Apache widow no one used to greet, walking beside a man who wasn't one of her own, yet looked at her like she was everything. The whispers didn't take long. "Did you see her? Like some kind of landowner? That man's either blind or bewitched. Bad things come to those who forget their place." And among all the voices, two cut sharper than knives, Taya Crow and Lyra Holloway. Standing by the vegetable stall, their eyes were thorns. "This is getting out of hand," Taya muttered. "That witch thinks she's entitled to everything now, even lets herself smile." "She won't last," Lyra scoffed. "Women like her always fall after they rise." Days later, Cole was lining up some boards to build a small awning behind Nita's house when a familiar figure came walking up the path. It was Lyra, wearing a red-striped skirt and a fitted blouse. She was smiling, but her eyes gleamed with a sweetness that didn't reach her heart. "Good afternoon, Cole. Got a minute?" He set the hammer down on the bench. "Sure. There are some things you might not know about your friend, things folks around here remember." Cole glanced at her sideways. "What kind of things?" "About her husband, Rael Redfeather. They say his death was strange, that it wasn't illness, that Nita was there alone with him, and then he wasn't breathing anymore." Cole's brow furrowed. "You implying something?" "I'm not implying," she replied with a half-smile. "Just suggesting you ask around. Don't let yourself get blinded by a few soft words and a pitiful look." Without waiting for a response, Lyra turned on her heel and walked away, leaving behind the scent of strong perfume and the seed of a doubt. That night, the air in the house felt heavier. Nita noticed Cole spoke less, that when he looked at her, it wasn't with the same steady clarity but with something else. A veil, almost invisible, but real. And when he asked, straight out, about Rael's death, the world caved in around her. "You think I killed him too?" she said, her voice like burned paper. Cole looked at her. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. And that was enough to break something. Nita took a step back, swallowing her tears. She pointed to the door with a trembling hand. "Leave. If you had to ask that, then you never really knew me." And Cole left. Not in anger, not in pain, but with the quiet clumsiness of a man who didn't know how to protect what was just beginning to grow. Night fell over Verde Valley with a thick silence, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Nita Redfeather shut the door with tense hands. The hearth crackled softly, but the warmth didn't reach her chest. Cole Mercer had walked away without raising his voice, without a fight, without saying anything cruel. But the silence he left behind cut like a dull knife. It didn't slice all at once, but tore slowly. For 3 days, the wind passed through her house without bringing news. Quito, who had begun to see something father-like in Cole, didn't ask. But his movements turned stiffer, his gaze more distant. Suri, on the other hand, stopped drawing and spoke only in whispers, as if afraid to break something invisible. Nita noticed it all. Every change, every absence, every step that never came. She couldn't explain it, but that single question Cole had asked, so blunt, so out of place, had crushed her deeper than all the past insults combined. Not because she believed he hated her, but because his doubt had called into question not just her innocence, but her soul. Because when someone you're beginning to love stops believing in you, it breaks you in places that never truly heal. On the 4th night, while Nita stirred soup for the children, a faint sound in the back of the house startled her. It wasn't the wind. With quick but quiet steps, she moved to the back door. She opened it without thinking. And there, in the shadows of the willows, stood Lyra Holloway, her eyes burning like coals. "What are you doing here?" Nita asked, her voice steady. Lyra smirked. She held a small sack in one hand, and there was something snake-like in her stance. Beautiful, but ready to strike. "I didn't come to talk. I came to give you a choice. I have nothing to say to you." "Oh, but you do," Lyra whispered. "Because if you don't do what I say, everything you love will burn. You understand? You, your shack, your children, Cole, everything. I'll take it all from you, just like you took it from me." "Took what from you?" A man's gaze. "The only one who didn't look at me like I was just a piece of meat. That man was mine, and you, dressed in rags with those sad eyes, you bewitched him." Lyra tossed the sack at Nita's feet. When she opened it, Nita saw ashes, broken feathers, and a cloth doll stitched with human hair. Cheap witchcraft. A ritual meant to scare. "Next time it won't be symbolic," Lyra said coldly. "Next time, it'll be real fire." Nita took a step back, but she didn't scream. She didn't run. Her eyes hardened like stone that's been struck 1,000 times and still holds. "You have no idea who I am," she said. "You didn't break me. But I will." And Lyra vanished into the trees like an old shadow. That night, Nita slept at the doorway, a blanket over her knees and a knife tucked beneath her dress. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just stared into the fire as if searching for answers in the flames. But she found no answers, only silent promises. That she would protect her children. That she would never trust so easily again. That she would never allow fear to rule her life again. And at dawn, when Cole Mercer finally appeared, head lowered, eyes full of apology, she didn't smile. "I came because I was wrong," he said. "Because I doubted. Because I believed what I shouldn't have." "That isn't undone with a visit," Nita replied, unmoving in the doorway. "I know. But if you'll let me, I want to start again, from where I failed. From faith." She looked at him, not with anger, not with tenderness, but with the gaze of someone who no longer allows herself to dream without conditions. "I don't know if that's possible anymore," she said, barely audible. "But if you want to be here, you'll have to prove it every day, not with words, with actions, with truth." Cole nodded. "Then I'm staying." And that was his promise. No flowers, no applause, no kiss. Just two broken people, trying to mend what might still be saved. Dawn arrived like an open wound. There was no rooster's crow, no cool breeze, only a dry, almost unreal heat that made even the dust move carefully. Nita Redfeather woke with a sharp pain in her chest. Something wasn't right. She felt it in her bones, like old folks who know rain is coming even when the sky is clear. Cole Mercer had slept outside, wrapped in a blanket beside the shed. He hadn't wanted to cross the threshold until she allowed it. He was keeping his promise without words, day after day, present, silent, steady. But that morning, everything would be different. Suri was gathering dried flowers to make an infusion. Quito was chopping wood, unaware that the axe wouldn't be the only thing he'd need to wield that day. Nita was preparing coffee when she heard the crack. A misstep behind the house. A shadow that wasn't Cole. A breath too quick. Fear lodged itself in her throat. She grabbed the knife from the table and stepped outside slowly, circling the side of the shed. There stood Lyra Holloway, hair wild, face twisted by hatred, eyes burning like hot coals. In her hands, a flask filled with dark liquid, and farther away, on the ground, a makeshift torch. "I warned you," Lyra spat. "I told you, you damned witch!" "Lyra," Nita began, her voice steady, not raised. "You took everything from me." Lyra was shaking. "He was mine. Mine. And you, with your martyr's face, with your poor little good girl eyes, you stole him." "He was never yours," Nita replied slowly. "Love isn't stolen, and it isn't begged for." Lyra raised the torch, ready to hurl it onto the dry wood surrounding the house. And then it happened. Quito, who had watched the scene from behind the well, came running with the axe still in hand. Without thinking, without hesitation. Only with the fire of someone who won't let his home be torn from him again. "Don't touch my mother!" he shouted, planting himself in front of Lyra, eyes fierce, chest heaving. The torch wavered in the air. At that moment, the sound of hooves shattered the silence. Cole Mercer arrived at full speed, dismounted without stopping, and in 2 strides stood between Lyra and the house. He snatched the torch from her hands and flung it far, where it hissed into the dirt and went out with a moan of smoke. "That's enough," Cole roared. "Enough of your games, your lies, your poison." Lyra backed away, for the first time with true fear on her face. "You gonna hit me now? Is that what you do for your new family?" "No," said Cole. "I'm not gonna dirty my hands on you, but you're going to answer for what you've done, and everyone will know." That afternoon, Cole and Nita brought Lyra to the town council. They didn't ask for revenge, only justice. They spoke, no tears, no dramatics, just the facts, one by one. The threats, the letters, the doll, the fire. The silence that followed was long, heavy, until Elder Mateo, the oldest member of the community, rose and spoke. "For years we turned our backs on Nita Redfeather. We judged her for her face, for her poverty, for her past. We let envy grow beneath our feet. Today, that envy nearly cost us a life, or 2. He turned to Lyra, who could no longer lift her eyes. "Your punishment won't be exile. That would be too easy. You'll work the communal lands, every day, in full view of all, until you learn that respect isn't demanded, it's earned." Lyra said nothing. She only bowed her head, her spirit in pieces. That night, Nita returned home. Suri hugged her without a word. Quito, hands still dusty, looked at her like he'd just learned what courage really meant. And Cole looked at her the way he had at the beginning, as if everything could begin again. But now they both understood. Love alone isn't enough unless it's defended. And sometimes, The most dangerous fire isn't the one that burns houses. It's the one that consumes you from the inside, if you don't face it in time. The air had changed in Verde Valley. It no longer smelled of ashes or fear, but of turned soil and fresh wood. After the storm, everything seemed quieter, as if the earth itself were waiting for what came next. Nita Redfeather hadn't spoken much since it all happened, but her steps were firmer. Her silences spoke louder. She was no longer the woman who feared. She was the woman who endured. That morning, while Quito repaired the fence with Cole and Suri gathered stones from the garden, Nita decided to clean out the back of the old shed. A place she hadn't touched in years, full of old boxes, rusted tools, and torn sacks. The wood creaked beneath her feet. Dust rose in the air like forgotten memories. That's when she noticed it. A floorboard looser than the rest. A hollow sound when she stepped on it. She knelt down carefully. Lifted it. Beneath it, a hidden space, a small iron chest weathered by time. The lock was broken, but the lid still resisted. Nita pried it open, and for a moment the world stopped. Inside were silver ingots wrapped in wool cloth, old papers sealed in red ink, and a folded letter in handwriting she recognized instantly. Her father's. Her hands trembled. Her heart pounded like a war drum. She opened the letter, read it aloud in a whisper, as if afraid the wind might overhear. My daughter, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here. And if you've found this place, then fate has brought you to what is yours. This land was not always misery. There was a time it was ours, when we grew corn and raised cattle. They took it from me with lies, forged signatures, and fear. But I kept what I could. This chest is only part of it. The documents here restore your right to the 300 hectares that once belonged to the Red Feather family. Take back what's yours, and do better. With pride, your father. Nita let the letter fall into her lap. She took a deep breath. Sunlight streamed through the slats in the roof like golden knives. Her skin bristled, not from cold, but from dignity. That same day, with Cole at her side, she went to the land registry office in Temascal, where old archives still kept records from the days when Apache signatures were taken in ink, under pressure. At first, the officials were skeptical, but they examined the seals, the maps, the names. They verified the dates, cross-checked the plots, and then they said it, with a mix of surprise and respect. Mrs. Redfeather, this document is legal. You have a rightful claim to that land. It wasn't a thunderous victory. No applause, no fanfare. Just a single glance between Nita and Cole, like two people who knew they had just opened the door to something immense. The following weeks were full of work, but not survival work. This time it was rebuilding. Nita didn't drive anyone out. On the contrary, she offered jobs to those in need. She repaired the irrigation ditches, commissioned the construction of a small school at the center of the valley, so the children, even those from families who once shunned her, could learn to read. Cole stayed at her side, quietly. He knew it was her time. And she thanked him without words, only through gestures and looks that said more than any poem ever could. Taya Crow watched from afar, silent now. She no longer dared speak. Lyra, humiliated and made to work for the community, avoided crossing paths. But Nita, she didn't carry hatred. She didn't look back. Not anymore. Because when the land, the very land that once crushed you, gives back what was once yours, you don't use it to crush others. You honor it. And that's what she did. With every seed she planted. With every child's laughter. with every drop of sweat that fell without bitterness. Because now Nita Redfeather wasn't just a woman who had suffered. She was a woman who had overcome. Time in Verde Valley began to flow with a different rhythm. It wasn't just dust or hunger or whispers that moved people anymore. It was the look. That quiet look with which, little by little, without needing words, everyone now looked at Nita Redfeather. Something had shifted when the news spread like wind through the poplars. The Apache woman who once hid behind her apron and silence was now the rightful owner of the most fertile land in the valley. But more than that, she was the one who had not returned the contempt she'd received. She had answered with work, with schools, with clean water and jobs for all, even for those who had once turned their backs on her. She didn't become rich in spirit overnight. She had always been. Only now, finally, the world had begun to see it. Each morning, Nita rose with the first song of the goldfinches and walked to the new irrigation canal to make sure the water reached the fields. After that, she passed by the little school where Suri, her daughter, now learned to read, alongside the same children who once ignored her. At the community workshop, Quito helped raise new stables, expecting nothing in return. He'd grown strong like an oak, his heart full of respect for his mother, his head held high. No one called him the widow's boy anymore. Now they called him by his name. And that said everything. One afternoon, as the wind swept dry leaves across the porch, Nita received a visit she hadn't expected. Taya Crow appeared without warning, hat in hand, her words caught in her throat. Her eyes, once proud, sharp, now held a tremble that had nothing to do with the cold. "I didn't come for forgiveness," she said bluntly. "I wouldn't dare ask for it. I just wanted to see you." Nita looked at her. No expression. Not harsh, not soft. Just present. "You mean, see me here?" Taya nodded, lowering her gaze. "I spent years thinking you had it easy, that if you didn't smile, it was out of pride, that if you didn't speak, it was out of contempt. But it wasn't. It was because no one ever gave you space to do either." The silence between them filled with years, with thorns, with guilt. Nita walked to the table, poured water into a clay cup, and set it on the railing. "Drink it. It's clean." Taya accepted it like someone receiving more than a glass, like someone receiving a chance not to remain who they once were. "I admire you," she whispered before leaving, "even if it's hard." That night, Nita watched her children sleep. Suri clutched her notebook. Quito still had dust on his hands. Outside, Cole Mercer was slowly sharpening a tool, humming an old tune. They weren't rich, they weren't powerful, but what they had was real. Cole walked over with a calm step. He looked her in the eyes, and without a word, he held out his hand. She took it, not as a promise of love, because that had already been sown, but as a sign that now, finally, they walked at the same pace. The next day, as she crossed the town square, many lowered their heads when they saw her. Not in shame, in respect. Others greeted her by her full name. No one dared call her the widow or the strange one. A little boy pointed at her and asked his mother, "Who is she?" And the woman replied without hesitation, "That's Nita Redfeather, the one who didn't let herself be defeated." And that sentence alone told the whole story, because dignity, like wheat, can't be bought. It must be planted, watered, tended, and when it bears fruit, it feeds everyone. Summer slowly withdrew from Verde Valley, like an old man leaving in silence. The days grew shorter, but the warmth still clung to the stones at dusk. The cicadas went quiet earlier than usual, and the wind began to carry the scent of autumn. damp soil, soft smoke, new-cut wood. Nita Redfeather sat on the porch of her home, now sturdy, alive, with a garden, chickens, and a school 50 meters away, and watched the horizon bathed in orange. In her lap, a blanket woven by the women of the town. In her hands, a notebook where Suri wrote stories about talking animals without fear of laughing. Beside her, Cole Mercer peeled an apple with his old knife. He didn't need to say much anymore. Since the day Nita agreed to walk with him without looking back, everything else seemed to find its place on its own. "They say this winter'll be dry," he murmured. "And if it's long, may it find us ready," she replied, eyes still on the sky. They weren't talking about the weather. They never were. That night, after the children went to bed early, Nita stayed alone by the fire, her eyes open. She thought of her father, of the letter, of what he had hidden, not just beneath the earth, but inside her soul. She thought of all the times she'd wanted to give up, and how, for reasons even she didn't understand, she hadn't. The days that followed carried on. No parades, no celebrations, but with respect. Nita had learned to say no without fear, to give orders without raising her voice, to listen without judgment. People no longer avoided her. Now they sought her out, to ask for advice, to ask for work, or simply to greet her with a handshake, even those who had once thrown stones at her, with words. One Sunday, after community service, Lyra Holloway approached with a basket of bread. "I don't expect anything," she said, her voice tired. "I just wanted to leave this. It's what I know how to do." Nita took the bread, broke it, and offered her half. "If one day you want to sit and talk," she said softly, "I'll be here." Lyra nodded. Her eyes no longer burned with rage, only exhaustion. But beneath that weariness, something seemed to stir, something that, perhaps with time, might become redemption. By the time spring arrived, the little school had more children than desks. Suri had begun teaching the younger ones their letters. Quito, barely 16, had become the blacksmith's apprentice. As for Nita, she had found a new task: to sow dignity, not with speeches but by example. She wore no jewelry, no fancy dresses, but her stride was steady, and her name was spoken with pride. One day, a stranger asked an old man in town, "Who is that woman everyone greets before she even speaks?" And the old man replied, "That's Nita Redfeather, the woman who lost everything and didn't lose herself." That night, Nita found a moment alone. She sat on her wooden bench and looked up at the star-filled sky. The fire crackled nearby, and the crickets sang their familiar tune. She thought of her journey, of the pain, of the eyes that judge, of the ones that love, of the land, of the blood, of the women who do not break, even when the world tries to bend them. And then she thought of something else. Something you, reader, might ask yourself too. How many people have we judged by what we see, without knowing what battles they fight within? How many Nitas have we made invisible, without realizing they were stronger than all of us combined? The story of Nita Redfeather did not end here. But this chapter does. And perhaps when you step back into the world, you'll remember that behind every quiet face, there may be a woman who, one day, saved not just her land, but her dignity.